Should I call you Thomas or your
Eromose says, cool. Yeah,
Eromose?
yeah, that's good.
Okay, Eromose. Well, it's an interesting name. Does that have a meaning?
Yeah, well, it's actually means gift from God, but it's my middle name. It's actually my real name. It's my real name. It's my
Mhm.
middle name. So Thomas is my first name. Eromose is my middle name. So it's not like a made up. It's not a made up name. It's on my birth certificate. Put it that way.
Oh well. Well, hey, congratulations for 88. I mean, I was thrilled from beginning to end. I don't know why. Maybe I just love politics and thrillers, but let's ask that question we always ask is where did you get that original idea from for 88?
Yeah, I mean, look, I like conspiracy thrillers anyway. So I grew up on movies. My father was a movie collector. We had thousands of films on Betamax, VHS, and so on. So I grew up on things like, All the President's Men, Parallax View, Marathon Man, JFK, so on and so forth. So I already had that sort of sensibility before I got into the movie business. And I just felt, on a basic level, as a Black filmmaker, as a Black person in society, I felt it's really strange that I've never had a conspiracy thriller from the perspective of a Black character or the Black community. Because I felt that once you do that, things change pretty dramatically in terms of how you would tell that story. So that was already exciting to me from that perspective of doing something like that. But in the general politics of society and what was going on in the press and in the news with the police shootings and this, I started questioning what racism really was. I didn't believe it was as simple as there's bad people and there's good people, and everybody who's anti-Black or racist is a bad person inherently. I started seeing that no, it's way more complicated, and it probably has a lot more to do with power than it does to do with an inherent innate evil within people. So once I started unpeeling that onion and started in researching, I was like, oh, wow, people have already written about this stuff. A lot of people have theorized about this. So that really just led me down a rabbit hole. And then obviously you end up with the white supremacist, symbolism, their ideology, how far back hundreds of years that goes, and so on and so forth. And things just started piecing together. And then obviously with Citizens United, I was aware of that, but the conversation was really hotting up in 2015 when I wrote the original script, because they were seeing the real impacts of the 2010 ruling of Citizens United. And I was like, yo, this has killed politics. And that was what really came up, maybe the idea of like, okay, you can actually have an opportunity for something really nefarious to find its way deep, deep, deep into American politics without anybody knowing. And that was just fascinating to me. I was like, wow, this would make a great vessel for talking about all the things I want to talk about. So that was it.
What makes this film scary is the fact that your story was believable. Like after watching it, was like, is this happening now?
Of course it can happen. Of course. I won't tell you who he was, but I had somebody who worked with a very prominent presidential candidate super PAC who did compliance for me of the script. So the compliance was just to make sure, A, am I accurate to how super PACs work? And B, could this happen? So he said, I want to be anonymous, but yes, it can happen. It's improbable. And I said, why is it improbable? Because I just don't, okay, look, it could happen. And that was how the conversation ended. Because he said, yes, like everything you've put out here, if those sorts of people wanted to do that, they could do it, because what Citizens United allows for is complete anonymity and limitless funding. So anybody, you could have the mafia do it, you could have China do it, you could have Russia do it. So it was ironic to me because everybody was focused on the Hillary Clinton emails. But I was like, there's a much bigger, directly linkable way for the Russian government, if they wanted to affect American politics. And it's legal because you've legalized it through Citizens United and super PACs. So if any oligarchs in Russia wanted to fund a candidate, they could put $100 million into a candidate and you wouldn't even know it, So it's very real, very, very really possible, I should say.
I found it interesting that you took the tact of white supremacy, because that's a term like now these days is thrown out like it's just like candy on Halloween. Like, dude, it's so much confusion that's thrown out. Like no one even knows what white supremacy is anymore to this point, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean it's become a buzzword, and I think it's been politicized now. So what it's become is that whether you're on the right complain that, oh, you're just using white supremacy as an excuse for everything. The left say white supremacy is the root of everything that goes wrong with our campaign, with a lost election, with this, without anybody actually really talking about what it is and the fact that it has very little to do with actual racial superiority. And it has everything to do with power. Like that's the reason why it was created. It's not. Martin Luther King gave a speech that nobody's listened to, where he talked about the very same concept, saying that the poor white man and the poor black man in America late in the 1800s bound together because they had common issues and they started winning elections together. And when the powers that be saw that, that is when the Klan came up, because they needed to sort of stoke the flame of white superiority to rip that coalition apart and to give the poor white man something that they could hold on to that meant more than their own salvation. He said this in a speech that people can listen to. So it's like, I'm not talking about anything new. The concept of this thing being tied directly to economic power struggles has been said for 150 years. It's just that it's so buried, even with one of the most popular and famous civil rights leaders in the world, that they don't even know he said this. So I think you're right. It's a very weird thing that I don't believe it's racially connected personally. I think it's a power thing. So I don't look at a white person, an Asian, which is why I wanted so many races in the movie. I was like, look, all the stuff we're arguing about, we're one race, we're Homo sapiens, we're humans. This whole idea of your color of your skin or your phenotype making you different from me is ridiculous. And that's what I wanted the movie to really drill home as it got deeper and deeper in the conspiracy, is that when he meets that character at the end, he's really explaining to him that even, I don't want to spoil it, even the other guy is wrong because his mentality is old. Where we are now is a realization that they'll just find something else. It's white supremacy today. At some point, it'll become pure class, which is where I think we're going. Mm-hmm. I think we're getting to that point where we're not going to transition from a race-based thing to a purely rich and poor thing.
Yeah.
Where people get striated into class levels regardless of your skin color. That's where we're going. You know.
I love this conversation with you because I feel like I'm talking to someone who watches the news all the time or something like that.
I'm very politically interested, but mainly in world politics. So I watch politics of all different countries, you know, all hemispheres, because I think politics is a very good representation of how societies work, and especially taking the temperature of those societies. So when I generally talk about this stuff, I'm talking from a position of looking at African politics, European politics, American politics, East sort of Asia, and looking at what's happening there, even though I'm not as familiar, and saying that, okay, what are the similarities in how all of these people operate? And it's always the same. It's power, and money is just a way of attaining power, but it's always power. So once you understand that, it becomes really interesting when you start weaving a story that is different from what you're used to seeing in this space.
So when you're doing all this research for yourself, how did you not get trapped into all this conspiracy stuff yourself? I mean, how do you clean it off the internet? Because anybody who goes down that rabbit hole, most people don't come back.
That is a very good question. And it's actually rooted in my culture, in the sense that as a Black man living in the world, there are certain unavoidable experiences that I've had through living in the UK, in Africa, in America, and so on. When I'm making the movie, I'm therefore trying to answer questions I want answered for myself in real life. So I don't even need to go so deeply into conspiracy theory, because what I'm looking at is those 5 times I got stopped by the police when I didn't do anything, when they came into my house and accused me of robbing my own house, which did happen, when they accused me of robbing my neighbor's house, which did happen, when they all those incidents, why did that happen? What did I do, or what happened in the mind of that police officer when he stopped me? Why was his hand on his gun when I had no weapon and I was in flip-flops? You start asking real questions. Now, another filmmaker hasn't been through those experiences. I've never sold drugs, never held a gun, never been involved in anything like that. Yet I still had those experiences. So for me, it's less of some guy just going into conspiracy theory land, which is what would happen. Let's say a white filmmaker goes to Africa. He's not from there. So him investigating blood diamonds, it really is going into the blood diamond conspiracy. For me, talking about these issues, I'm like, nah, these are things. The kid talk about the police shooting thing. My friends have to have those conversations. It's not made up. It's like those conversations really happen. And I use the exact dialogue from the conversations. So what I wrote in the script isn't made up dialogue. That is exactly the sequence of how it's discussed. So once I do that and I put it out there, it sort of blocks that falling down the rabbit hole thing. Because where it stops is I just want to understand for myself so that I don't lose my sanity. Because James Baldwin said, to be Black and aware is a case of perpetual insanity or something. I can't remember the exact phrasing. It's a paraphrase. But he said, if you know what is happening as a Black person in America, it is almost like being in a state of constant madness. And it is me trying to quieten that by trying to answer these questions that, yes, to some viewers, they'll be like, this is insane. This is ridiculous. But for me and people who connect with the film, like yourself and other critics who have, they understand. It's like, no, it's an investigation. And it's sort of, you know, that was a convoluted answer, but hopefully it makes sense.
No, you're great. But I am curious though, because I never heard of 88 as a as some kind of link to anything. Was that real or was that made up?
Right. Yes, real, 100% real. I didn't know about it either. What it was I knew I wanted a symbol. I needed a symbol. I knew I was dealing with white supremacy and power. And I asked a colleague, just give me a number, some kind of sign that white supremacists use. And he said, oh, I've got one. And he said 88. And I was like, what's that? He said, hell. I was like, what? Then I investigated. I'm like, oh, this is really prevalent. I'd seen it before. So even after I used it, I started seeing it in society. Like I'd see people in bars, I'd see it in places. And I was like, now I know what that means. So it's been around, like, you know, it's been around for since the 40s, like the 40s or 50s. I just didn't know what it meant, you know, and now I do. So it's very real. The crooked cross as well is real. Like, you know, I changed a lot of the things I talk about. Very little is made up, put it that way. I strung it together in fiction. Very little about what I put in there is fantasy. It's all real.
Okay.
Which is a bit scary, but true.
Well, one more note. I want to add, you don't have to reveal the ending, but I want to know is why you ended the film in the particular way that you ended it.
I ended it that way because I wanted to emulate the helplessness of the average Black person within this system that I've laid out in the film. And the fact that this character, the only thing that character can do is willful ignorance to the situation. Like, you now know what you know, you've seen what you've seen, but at least if you can keep your family safe within your home, within your own little ecosystem, maybe things will be okay. So I wanted to end it in a way that it's not so much hopeful, but it's realistic. No one person is going to take this thing apart. It's not going to happen. So I didn't want to make a movie where, oh, he's heroic and he starts unraveling the whole. That's not happening. It's that now the reality is life goes on. This goes on. He now knows what it is, but he can't do anything about it. So the best you can do is try to pretend it never happened, which I imply he won't be able to. And that was why I ended that way.
Well said. Hey, it's been a pleasure. I can't wait to see what your next film is. Maybe there's another political thriller. Who knows?
No. I'm going comedy next. You know, I'm going to romance and comedy.
Oh, well, that's far from a political thriller. So it's been a pleasure, and hopefully we get to do this again with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.